Hey guys, Joel's coming at you with another reasoning session, and today I'm going to be talking about the Red Sea time that we as a society have been going through recently.
Come now and let us reason together. Come now, we can talk it over.
Now earlier I made mention about this Red Sea time that we're all facing with, everything that's being exposed with the institutions and just society at large. And it's going to culminate with an Elijah moment. And that moment is going to be one where the divinity of Source is expressed in such a way that nobody can argue it. But the Red Sea time is a process that we as society have to go through. We have to actually cross the Red Sea, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in this episode. But before I get into it, if you really like these videos, you can actually follow me on Rumble and or on Zappit. I'll be posting my videos on there because honestly, YouTube is messing around with the algorithm and shadow banning and all that stuff. It's real, but I'm not going to complain. I'm just going to move these videos onto other platforms because this message is coming out. And there's nothing that the kingdom of darkness can do to stop it. So the links are down in the description. You can check that out if you like. But I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. So after the children of Israel left Egypt after the Passover, they went out and camped right in front of the Red Sea. And then we read in the book of Shemot, or Exodus, starting at the 5th verse of the 14th chapter. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people. And they said, "Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" Now they literally just went through the 10 plagues, and they didn't have anything left in their society to stand on. I've done a video on this before showing how each of those plagues countered the common belief of the Egyptians at the time in one of their false gods, one of these masks that they put on to Source and define nature as divine rather than the source of that nature as divine. So when nature itself failed them, when the Nile failed them and the frogs failed them and the hailstorms and the cattle and all these things, the very light of Ra in the plague of darkness failed them. And of course, eternal life in the Hank hit the firstborn of all of Egypt, all the way from the lowest to the house of Pharaoh. He still hasn't learned his lesson. And he made ready his chariot, and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over every one of them. And Yahweh hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with a high hand. But the Egyptians pursued after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them encamping by the sea, beside Pi-hahirot before Baal-zephon. And Baal-zephon literally means Lord of the North Wind. And we'll get to why that's important in just a little bit here. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto Yahweh. And they said unto Moses, "Because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore have you dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell you in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness." And Moses said unto the people, "Fear you not, stand still, and see the salvation of Yahweh, which he will show to you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you shall see them again no more forever. Yahweh shall fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." Now I want to point out the meaning of that term Egyptians. In the Hebrew language, that term is the word Mitzrayim. And it's literally the same word used for Egypt and the Egyptians. It's the plural form of the term Matzor. And it's plural because Egypt was literally Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt at the time. So we're talking about both kingdoms here. But Matzor literally means a limit or an entrenchment. In the context of Egypt, it's referring to how the Nile narrows. But literally, when we're applying this to our own lives, it can refer to any kind of constraints, any kind of restrictions, any kind of hemming in. And by extension, this word actually means besiegements. So any kind of obstacle that you're facing where things look bleak and it looks like things are pressing in on you, like they're oppressing you, that's what this term means. And Moses tells the people, For the Egyptians, the constraints, whom you have seen today, you shall see them again no more forever. So then we move on a bit in the text, and it says, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and Yahweh caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. Now it's interesting, we think of Cecil B. DeMille. We see Charlton Heston stretch out his rod and say,
behold his mighty hand.
and in an instant the sea parts. But it says here that it took a strong east wind that blew all night to split the sea. So, a lot of this is romanticized in Hollywood, but when we really read the text, we get a completely different story. And that east wind was literally the counter to Tzafon, or the north wind, who was literally the lord of that location where they crossed over. So it's like even that God was defeated in this whole process. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch Yahweh looked unto the hosts of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of cloud, and troubled the hosts of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drove them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for Yahweh fights for them against the Egyptians. And Yahweh said unto Moses, Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared. And the Egyptians fled against it, and Yahweh overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the hosts of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. And it's interesting that, it talks about the children of Israel crossing on dry land, but it doesn't say anything about the Egyptians crossing on dry land. It says that they bogged down heavily, that even their chariot wheels were falling off. And that's even more of a miracle, because it was only dry where the children of Israel were crossing.
On the first dive, Ron found chariot wheels preserved by the coral which had attached to it. He found an axle with portions of each wheel still present. These chariot wheels were very difficult to see and recognize because they are covered in coral, and the portions that were not covered have disintegrated. In February of 1988, he found this gold four-spoke chariot wheel in the same general area. There is no coral on the main part of the wheel, because coral doesn't attach to gold, only around the hub area where some wood was exposed when it came off the chariot.
And in terms of what we're going through right now, we're literally at this crossing. We're seeing the people that are awake, the people that are questioning the institution and the media and the medical and all this stuff, politics and blah, blah, blah. We're actually crossing over, and there are those of us that were at the leading edge, and there are those of us that are following. But right now, the last of that group is crossing through and making it to the other side. And once that happens, the sea is going to close on the pursuers, on the oppressors, on these constraints on our society that have been holding us back all this time. We were living in their land. We were doing what they were saying. But now as we're leaving, we're actually crossing this Red Sea. And once this sea closes back on them, it's going to be over. And we're going to be on the other side. We're going to be crossing over into the promised land. As long as we don't get stuck in the wilderness, we're going to see the fruits of the seeds we've planted. And we're going to live in this land flowing with milk and honey. And I mean literally, we are here to create this heaven on earth. We're here to bring the kingdom of heaven alive through our own bodies as source manifested in physical form. So tap in and be on the leading edge, because once this gate closes, it's going to be too late to look back. You don't want to be like Lot's wife when she turned back to look back at Sodom as it was burning, because although her body had left Sodom, her mind was still there, and she turned back and she was turned into a pillar of salt. So let's really embody the purpose that Source has called us to in this life and manifest our best life yet. Not just for us, but for those around us and for future generations, because we know that we deserve more than we've been given. And we're here for such a time as this. So I love you guys. I'll check you in the next reasoning sesh. Joel signing out once again. Agape. Salaam. Namaste. Shalom.